Hello and welcome back to the NWR Virtual Healthcare Conference. My name is Matt Wright. Next up, we have ImmVirX, which is one of our private companies presenting as part of the conference. Joining us is the CEO, Dr. Malcolm McColl. Before we get started, a reminder for anyone in the audience that has a question, please feel free to type it in using the Q&A panel within the Zoom app. Malcolm, I'll hand it over to you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. And thanks for the invitation to the conference. And it looks like you've got an excellent conference, actually. So well done to NWR Healthcare. Yeah, look, really pleased to be here today and provide an update to our shareholders and interested other potential investors in the company with some actually big news we'll be reporting on in today's presentation. So look forward to getting to that. So why don't we just move into the next slide, please, Matt? And it's just our standard disclaimer slide. So that's on our website if folks want to take a look at it. I think the next slide is just looking really at our ambition. And look, we are an oncolytic virus company, which means a company that's developing cancer-killing viruses. Our goal is to provide deep and durable responses with a high quality of life in patients with some of the most globally important cancer types. This is by developing and using our proprietary bio-selected receptor-targeted RNA oncolytic virus. This is really an approach which we've developed initially with Viralytics CAVATAK, which was successfully targeted melanoma. We've now gone to the next level with a next generation bioselection program to target other cancer, more important cancer types, actually. So the approach is for the oncolytic virus to kill the cancer itself, cancer cells themselves outright. But then also it's sort of a 1-2 punch because this also stimulates the influx of immune cells into the tumor. And those immune cells then can also really nicely target the cancer, not just at the site of injection, but also at other sites around the body. It also generates a kind of an immune response that enables greater activity of some of the biggest cancer-killing drugs like the immune checkpoint inhibitors, drugs like Keytruda. So should be really excellent synergy when combined with those agents, as we saw with Viralytics CAVATAK and Keytruda. Whilst also offering a really favourable safety profile, again, as we saw with Viralytics CAVATAK, and this will be an off-the-shelf therapy. There's no need for personalisation of the therapy. It's going to be a low-cost manufacture and can be scaled up to huge volumes quite readily, actually. Next slide, please. Really pleased to have this team together again. Darren and myself as co-founders. Darren was, of course, the inventor of the Viralytics CAVATAK and is inventor of the new agents and the platform technology that we're using. Robert Vickery is our CFO. Len Post again. Robert Ratley coming on board as a result of our Series A1 financing. Great to have him on the team. And really, this is the team that took Viralytics CAVATAK through the preclinical and clinical stage, through all the sort of manufacturing and regulatory interactions, leading up to the sale to Merck for an all-cash upfront of $500 million. So a nice outcome for shareholders there. Again, we're applying the Viralytics CAVATAK playbook here. Really pleased to have the Newcastle team together again, and we'll see that team in the next slide. But you can see we completed a Series A1 financing of $25 million in 2021, and still at the end of February this calendar year, we have almost 17 million left. So again, it's a very cost-efficient team that's achieved a lot in a relatively short period of time. Next slide, please. So these are the real heroes. I think this is really the best of any of the Aussie biotechs in terms of the quality, depth of experience and skills, right across all fields, including obviously preclinical, CMC or manufacture quality, and also, of course, taking us into the clinic. So this team really enabled us to move quite quickly, in fact, from the re-establishment of this team coming back together again, and the financing, and shortly about to enter the clinic. And I'll have more to say about that in just a minute, but this is really an exceptional team and very, very proud of them. Next slide, please. So look, cancer immunotherapy is the most important field for big pharma. It's had sort of meteoric growth in the last 10 years. That will continue, forecast to be around $300 billion in annual sales by 2030. And it has been transformative. It has enabled really long-term responses in patients, but still only for a subset of patients. What we want to achieve here is a much, much higher percentage of patients seeing responses and long-lasting responses. We think an oncolytic virus, a good oncolytic virus, as we saw with Cavitac and as we're developing here, has the potential to really drive those sorts of changes. So there's already interest in oncolytic viruses from big pharma, of course, including Merck's acquisition of Viralytics. Replimune is probably the best example of an oncolytic virus company listed on NASDAQ and a market cap of 1 billion. So, you can really get up to pretty significant valuations as you progress down the clinical pathway. Next slide, please. And look, I think on this occasion, we are really tackling the big cancer types. So colorectal is number 2 globally in terms of cancer lost lives. Gastric or stomach cancer is number 4. Liver cancer is a future target for us, actually not too much further down the line. So there you're talking the 2nd, 3rd and 4th most important cancer. And of course, ovarian cancer, also very important cancer type that we're additionally going to tackle. So these are big indications for us. I think the next slide, Matt, just gives you some comparison. You can see initial targets, colorectal, ovarian and gastric. You're talking about tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of lives lost per annum in the US and China. Liver cancer or hepatocellular carcinoma, also in the tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands, compared to melanoma, where you're talking sort of several thousand across those 2 markets. We sold Viralytics for 500 million. If we get the right result that we're hoping to see across these new indications, I think it'll be a much bigger number for ImmVirX. In terms of the 4th column there, you can see the ORR, which is the response rate to these immune checkpoint inhibitors, is also very modest, sort of in the single digits or sort of mid-teens for our initial targets, compared to melanoma, where the response is sort of in the 30%. So there's a massive room for improvement in such a substantial number of patients across the globe. Next slide, please. This is just really what they call a Kaplan-Meier curve. It really just sort of shows the lifespan, I suppose, of patients following treatment. And TAS-102 is sort of the standard chemotherapy that is used in late-stage colorectal cancer patients, compared in this case to placebo or best supportive care for these patients. And what this slide shows you is that the best agents at the moment really only add about a couple of extra months of life to patients with late-stage colorectal cancer. So there's a desperate need for better therapies here, and we think an immunotherapy like our oncolytic virus really has the potential to drive much better responses in patients in this setting and in the other targeted cancer indications. Next slide, please. So look, a lot to unpack here. I'll just sort of go to the high level, but in terms of the platform, we have a 2nd generation bioselection platform. It's improved on what we used for Viralytics Cavitac. This has been invented by Dr. Shafran, as I said, our co-founder. This really selectively drives the oncolytic virus for the receptors that are overexpressed on these cancer types, whilst leaving healthy cells pretty much alone. So it's exquisite really in terms of its selectivity for cancer cells. It's really a proven mechanism. We saw this with Viralytics Cavitac in terms of inflaming tumours, driving immune cells into the tumour, and really, as I said earlier, giving that 1-2 punch of not just the virus, but also getting the immune system up and running against the cancer. And then in terms of the clinical strategy, this virus specificity really enables us to target these important cancer types. We'll start off by using the agent as a monotherapy or alone, and then combine with the checkpoint inhibitors. And I guess the final bullet point there on the right side is that we have a clear clinical pathway. And the big news is that we have 2 trial sites open now, and we're open for recruitment. We're actively looking for patients. I think we'll have some very good news soon about the first patient enrolling in the study. So a really important milestone as we move forward and transition to a clinical stage oncology company. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this is just, I'll move through these pretty quickly. I think this audience has probably seen the preclinical work previously, but this is sort of the standard type of study you conduct in these mice that lack an immune system. where you implant cancer cells into the left flank and let those grow for a period of time. And then we dosed just on one occasion with IVX-037 and compare that to a control group. And then we monitor for the health of the animal and also for the tumour burden as time progresses. Next slide. And this really just shows, in summary, the results we saw across two colorectal cancer cell lines. So again, the red line is really the IVX-037, and you can see the tumour volume or the tumour burden is really knocked right down there, obviously very suppressed, versus the control group where the tumour just bursts away and grows really rapidly. So two examples there for colorectal cancer. I think the next slide will show two examples for ovarian cancer, where we see the same effect. The red line is the tumour burden in the IVX-037 group. And this is again after a single dose. So a very nice activity of IVX-037 in colorectal and ovarian. And I think the next slide just shows one example in gastric cancer, where we had a very aggressive gastric cancer cell line. And again, we were able to suppress that, really knock that down with just one dose, in fact, of IVX-037. And again, these are immunodeficient mice, so no immune system. All the activity we were seeing here was just from a single dose of IVX-037. So really pleasing outcome here. Next slide, please. So again, we just want to take a look at different dose levels of IVX-037, and the red, green and purple line just shows a range of different doses with about a 10,000-fold difference. And it really shows there was quite a wide sort of therapeutic range here, where quite low doses of the virus were still very active in suppressing the tumour. The blue line in this case is the control. And again, you can see the tumour burden really just accelerated away in that setting. So nice to see we have a wide range of doses that are possible. The next slide, I think, takes a look at IV administration. This is in the future for us, but in this case, we implanted the mice with cells again, and then gave multiple intravenous administration of IVX-037 compared to a control group, and again monitored for the tumour burden. The next slide just really shows how that looks in terms of tumour volume, and again you can see the red is the IVX-037 treated group versus the blue being the control group. So again, very stark difference between the treated versus the control group. So nice early result for intravenous administration of IVX-037. Next slide, please. Preclinical tox. Look, this slide is a summary of really mountains and mountains of work, so it doesn't do justice to the huge volume of work that's required. But in terms of our preclinical work, there were no observations of any issues when we looked just at gross post-mortem. All the weight gains were okay, comparing the vehicle versus the IVX-037 treated group. All biochemistry and hematology was fine. In terms of histopath, there was nothing attributable to IVX-037 in the liver or the spleen, and in the remaining organs there were no significant findings. So this represents a huge body of work, but a really clean bill of health actually as we move forward. So nice outcome from our preclinical tox. The next slide. This is where it gets exciting. As I said, the study is now open now, so we're looking for our first patient. I think we'll have an announcement on that quite soon, in fact. And so obviously when you go first into man, you increase the dose gradually. The main thing to look for in early days is safety. We will be tracking for activity or efficacy, but the main thing is just to look for safety. So we'll move through that first phase 1 dose escalation proof of concept study. There'll be about 24 to 27 patients. Once we're through that, then we'll be looking to move into combination studies in combination with a checkpoint inhibitor, such as a drug like potentially Merck's Keytruda in that setting. So a lot of interest in this program. Obviously, we're treating very advanced stage patients. So it'll be wonderful to look for potential activity in that setting as a monotherapy. So really excited to move forward here. Next slide. I think this is really just, some of the recent milestones really in the last sort of 3 to 6 months, and again reflects the incredible sort of performance and results driven from the team in Newcastle and others in our ImmVirX family. Look, in terms of preclinical, we've got our final report on preclinical tox, which gave us a tick. We're underway with our assessment in the liver cancer cell line studies. We've received 2.8 million from the federal government. We've extended our agreement with HMRI. This is the Hunter Medical Research Institute in Newcastle, where we house our team, and great to have that extended through till late 2024. We've filed further provisional patents to cover a composition of matter, which is the most important sort of class of patent, which really covers the structure of IVX-037, and when granted will give us really extended protection in that setting. In terms of CMC and quality, we've released drug product, obviously, for the Australian sites. We have successfully completed our engineering batch at our facility, our contract facility in California. This is the practice run before we move into our first GMP batch in the US. And stability studies are ongoing and looking actually quite promising in that 2 to 8 degrees setting. In terms of the clinic, we have 2 sites open for recruitment. We have 2 further sites that we think will open in the next weeks, in the upcoming weeks. And then we're actively seeking further sites as we plan to move forward into new indications and also transition into a phase 1B study. So, you know, really pleasing that we're making that transition across to being a clinical stage company. A lot of interest from clinicians as we move forward to join the study, because it really does offer the opportunity to potentially provide options, good options for these patients with late stage disease. Next slide, please. So the upcoming milestones, obviously the preclinical studies, we'll be looking at the combination of IVX-037 with immunotherapies such as drugs like Merck's Keytruda. We'll complete our preclinical assessment in liver cancer indications. We're going to take a look at the safety and biodistribution of IVX-037 when administered intravenously. This will enable us to move in the future into IV delivery in patients. So that's going to be an important study that's about to get underway. And also, very importantly, we think this bioselection platform has worked so well for IVX-037 targeting these nominated cancer types that we are now going to develop a second asset. We think the learnings from this bioselection platform and the success of it really justifies looking at a second asset. So we're excited to get that program underway, and we'll say a lot more about that. So just broadening the scope of the company, putting in a second asset. And, you know, I think this is a big further milestone for the company and a huge further value add. In terms of manufacture and quality, we'll get underway shortly with our first GMP batch in the US. We'll generate further stability data on the improved formulation. And we're looking at some process improvements working in conjunction with our US contract manufacturer. In terms of clinical, we'll advance our phase 1A study through dose escalation. We'll be opening new sites as we advance towards phase 1B and new indication, and our planning for a US FDA IND filing is really going to really ramp up in the coming months. I think the next slide is the last slide, Matt. And, you know, really, it's a very proud day, I think, when you make that transition. You know, we commenced the company, we really only got underway about 3 years ago after we did our seed round. So we're now just right on the cusp of entering the clinical stage. Big milestone, a big value add for shareholders, and a big thank you to shareholders actually as we move into this point, and a big thank you to the team in Newcastle and others in the ImmVirX family to achieve this in such a timely way and such a cost efficient way. Actually, it must almost be a record in terms of cost efficiency to move into the clinic with a biological product this quickly and this cost efficiently. Really, there's a major opportunity for us in some of the most important cancer types where there's such a high unmet need. The preclinical data set looks great. It looks as good as Cavitac looked in melanoma. So, you know, really sets us up with a lot of enthusiasm as we move into the clinic. The contract manufacturer will have product available out of the US in the third quarter of this calendar year. We'll start getting clinical readouts, which is the most important thing in terms of thinking about partnerships and big pharma discussions. That clinical data will start to emerge as we move through 2023, and that just opens up lots of opportunities for us as we move through the year. As I said, importantly, we're building the company out. We think there's a real justification with all we've learned and with the success we've seen with this second generation bioselection platform. So excited to move into this second asset. And we continue to have with our as I say, frugality, I guess, on my part in particular, this sort of strong cash position, which gives us a runway through into the second half of calendar 2024. So, Matt, I hope I've left enough time for perhaps a couple of questions, but you know, we're just excited about where we are at the moment and what's ahead of us in 2023.
They certainly have. That was excellent, Malcolm. Thank you very much. As Malcolm has alluded to, if you have a question, please feel free to type it in using the Q&A panel within Zoom. I'll open up with one, Malcolm, which I think's the inevitable one around plans for IPO and sort of funding plans going forward. So can you just speak to what thoughts the board and management has on that front?
Yeah, look, it's obviously it's an interesting one because, you know, when the US biotech sector sort of crashed and it was at its peak, I think, in February 2021, you know, the Experie, which is the index for small and mid-cap biotechs, you know, I think it was about 170 at that stage, and it crashed to as low as about 60. I think it's still only in the sort of 70 to 80 range, and people were first predicting things would start to improve, you know, through 2022, and here we are in 2023, and I think people are saying, well, you know, it should start to improve through 2023. It's been a difficult time, and you know, the IPO window in the US, and I think to a great extent in this country, is still really closed, which is kind of remarkable when you consider that, as I say, the time from that we've been kind of in this tougher period. Look, I think from our point of view, the cash situation is quite good. I think once we get into the clinic, we'll get out there and obviously let people know about where we're at, present the data as it unfolds. But really the focus for us has been getting into the clinic, and we're in a strong cash position, and we'll just see how things unfold in the coming months, I think, as we generate data. But I think the IPO window is closed at the moment and may still be closed for the foreseeable future.
Thanks, Malcolm. One question that's come in is, will the clinical trial sites be in the US or elsewhere?
So the initial sites are going to be all in Australia. So happy to take any emails offline about that if folks are interested in it. But this is why the IND is important, and to get into the US. So once we have GMP material coming out of the Californian site and some early clinical data from our studies, we can then apply for an FDA IND. And I think probably that will be, you know, achieving the IND is probably not until sort of probably the second half of 2024. It's not actually such a big issue on this occasion because we want to get into the US, but there's plenty of patients in Australia because these are big cancer types. Once folks get to this sort of late stage of their disease, there really aren't good options. So therefore they look for clinical trials. So I think we'll be able to recruit quite well in Australia, but of course we'll follow the Viralytics playbook and start in Australia. Then once we have our IND, we'll operate and open sites in the US, and then with Viralytics, we actually also open sites in the UK, so that's possible as well. But I'm not concerned at this stage about recruitment in Australia. There's plenty of patients here, but the IND and opening sites in the US is really sort of for the back half of 2024, I think, Matt.
Very good. And I know you've got your hands full with the first asset, let alone the second, but you're looking at adding anything else to the portfolio?
Well, you know, I think that's where at this stage we're busy. So I think, you know, further financing would potentially help us add, strengthen the team further. So we do have ideas, and we think really great ideas to add further assets. And I think we've shown how cost effectively we can develop IVX-037. We can apply those learnings to second and then potentially third assets. So this is really a platform now, I think. And with the skills of this team, I think it's one that we can expand relatively quickly. So lots of opportunities for us here as we move forward, I think.
And on the team, I mean, Newcastle typically doesn't scream a sort of biotech hub. So how do you go with, I know you've got an excellent sort of senior team there, but how do you go with recruiting further staff for the site there?
Well, we've done really well. I mean, we've had a lot of youngsters come through, you know, PhD programs and join, and it's a, you know, it's actually interesting. You do sort of think of Newcastle as maybe being a coal and wineries type hub, I'm not sure, but rather than biotech, but there's a strong medical centre there, a big medical centre there. HMRI is a really impressive research institute in of itself. They're building further biotech and medical research facilities actually on that site as we speak right now. We've actually not had any issues recruiting. We've actually had sort of inbound calls from folks in the US who want to join our team. So I think when you have a great asset and a quality team, you're moving the program forward and a track record of success, it does actually really attract high quality people. So, you know, touch wood, we haven't had a problem with that. And, you know, the team just goes from strength to strength.
Excellent. Well, we'll leave it at that. So Dr. Malcolm McColl, thanks for the presentation today.
Thanks very much, Matt, and good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Next up, the final session for the day, we have Chimeric Therapeutics. So I hope you can join us for that one. Thank you.